Live streaming this broadcast as well. Good evening all on live stream as well as the PlayChess.com server. Just adjusting live stream board. Okay. So just adjusting a little bit. How is the board on live stream? Is it okay? Board okay? Ready to go? Good. Okay, there's a popular request to look at some Aronian wins, and I'll be honest with you, I find them very hard going to understand. So this is just sort of impressions, just basic impressions of some of these Aronian wins. There was one win I tried to cover and I analysed in great detail on my YouTube channel, but these are very tough to positionally understand, and sometimes they're quite long as well. So let's try and decipher them together. So Sergey Karjakin, who's 2769, was playing white against Levon, who is 2805 at the time of this game. And we're going to flip the board and let's try and get an impression of the game as best we can for what happened. Okay, so e4, and a very solid response from Levon. He plays e5, so he doesn't play like the French defense or the Sicilian. This is just solid, classical style, but sometimes he injects a great deal of dynamism from very solid positions, which makes him, very stable but aggressive, and he was able to do fantastically well in this Tata Steel tournament through such a style. So we have seemingly classical solid style. Knight f3, knight c6, Roy Lopez territory. White's not trying anything too clever here. a6, bishop a4, and now knight f6. So after castles, he now plays actually bishop e7. And it's possible that we might still enter a Marshall Gambit if White carries on theoretically, but White actually played now d3, which is a popular alternative to following the old theory. It's just solid, supporting the e4 pawn, and White usually plays for a slow kind of build-up in the centre, with maybe d4 coming later. Okay, so b5, bishop b3, and now Levon castles, a4. Now the first thing which Black's keen to do here is to make sure his queenside pawns are not such a liability, and I think this is all theory anyway. So b4 creates a kind of dark square grip, clearly move b4, it gains a bit of space. I think there might have been a5 in a Kasparov short game, or a short Kasparov game. So is there any downside to b4? It makes sure that the rook, still is confined by its own pawn. Okay, let's follow the game. Knight bd2, and there's also the c4 square is highlighted. That b4 means c4 is a little bit more vulnerable. Okay, bishop c5, eyeing that sensitive f2 pawn. And this diagonal actually is going to be important later, so make a note of this diagonal. The bishop on b3 at the moment is blocking the knight from b3. The bishop's difficult to evict at the moment. h3, d6. Doesn't look too special at the moment, the position. c3. And now Black plays rook b8. So look at Black's position. It looks very classical. All the pieces are good. The bishops are nice. The rook's okay. Doesn't seem to be too many weaknesses. Maybe a6 is a bit loose potentially. If White ever plays like this, maybe a6 is going to be a target. Possibly. Okay, but no, Black seems to have a great position. Rook e1, rook e8. And now actually this next move, a5, does fix the a6 pawn. It is fixed as a target. This rook is occupied, protecting against this, but if a6 is a fixed target, now maybe bishop c4 later will target, and also queen e2 maybe. So maybe a6 is the first target you could say might be an exploitable weakness in the black position. Levon plays bishop a7. Okay. After knight f1, now we see a very nice rerouting of the queenside knight to be more aggressively placed. It goes to e7, and we see this often, this knight g6, with the knights, potentially quite aggressive on these two squares. So this is the maneuver now to get knight g6, and both knights are staring at each other here. So we have a position where f2 might be vulnerable, f7 might be vulnerable. Sort of, in a way, it's a kind of almost symmetrical position in some respects, isn't it? This position here, kind of symmetrical. But now white thrusts in the center with d4. Okay, h6, depriving white of the use of the g5 square, complementing white on h3. So we've got symmetry here, haven't we? So symmetrical in many ways. Bishop c2, and now, okay, c5. This looks like, aggressively perhaps going to use the c file later, maybe. C file could become important, but white plays d takes e5, leaving this pawn on c5, hemming in the bishop. D takes e5, bishop d3, eyeing a6, because look, queen e2 would put a battery on a6 now. And this is the first surprise of the game, that instead of passively trying to defend this, actually it's used as bait to almost like trap the bishop now. So this next move is quite interesting, that Levon plays bishop e6, just letting this go, because there's a trap about to be unveiled for the bishop, which is c4, shutting the door behind the bishop. The bishop cannot retreat now. Okay, but has white got an escape plan in mind? He plays rook a4. So now if the pawn, takes or here, then this one will drop. So what's going on here? Queen c7, securing the blockage of the bishop, but losing another pawn. C takes b4. But now the weakness of f2 is exposed. Levon plays bishop takes f2, so he's getting back one pawn. Okay, check, and he's exposed the king slightly, coming to the center a bit. So he's just one pawn down now, but these are doubled. The rook's kind of misplaced here, so it seems black is doing fine still. His central control is good, it seems. There's a lot of central squares covered by these pieces. The queen c is interesting. There's no bad pieces in the black position. Okay, king g1. And now the d file is used, rook d8. And it looks as though d3 all of a sudden is very useful. It's supported by a pawn, this d3 pawn. So a pawn down, but it seems to be a positional, in effect, a positional pawn sacrifice, where look at black's rooks, they're able to come to the d file, and this rook is looking increasingly silly on a4. These pawns don't look brilliant. So it seems black has a very nice position here. White seemingly gone in for this bishop takes a6 and found a difficult position now here. Rook d1. And now rook b3, trying to regain technically to get full material equality again. Queen d2. Now the king moves to h7. King h2. Rook b7. Queen f2. And now winning back the pawn to attack this rook here with bishop d7. Okay, so this pawn looks as though it's going to drop now. It does. And white's, now faced with a lot of pressure on b2. Also a move like queen here or here to put more pressure on b2 would be very good. So black's got a very fine position from a very solid opening. he introduced a bit of dynamism somehow from his solid classical position to risklessly get this position where white is passive. Now white goes in for an attack here. White plays a very seemingly attacking move, knight h5. Okay, so the knight is protecting d7. So if knight takes, then rook takes d7. So is this a problem for black? Well, he moves the bishop, okay, because his queen is also on f6. He doesn't have to take, he can take with the queen. So far so good. Still pressure on b2. This rook's still silly on a2. So in this position, knight takes f6 was played, queen takes f6, and look also this juicy f4 square for this knight's good. So b2 still a problem. But has white got this passed pawn? Is that an asset for white? King g1 was played here. Okay, bishop b7, eyeing e4. How does white defend e4? Knight d2. Inviting an exchange of queens, and that's accepted. That invitation is accepted. Bishop takes. Rook d3, nasty pin. Nasty pin indeed. Threatening bishop takes e4 because of that pin. a6, white's using his asset of the a pawn, but it's only got 2 steps to go. Is it really dangerous? These 2 steps, are they a long way to go? We're about to find out. Bishop takes e4. The bishop can always go back to blockade here if needed. Rook e1, and it goes back to blockade. Pawn up for the first time in the game. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pawn up. Knight e4. Okay, knight f4. And now if the knight moves, maybe g2's under fire. Maybe also something like knight takes h3 might be dangerous, because we have some dangerous pressure building up here. a7. Okay, this pawn is looking quite dangerous, and it's protected by that bishop at the moment. f6. h4. And now, quite a seemingly very good move. Okay, the move c3 was played here, unveiling an attack on e4. And if knight takes c3, then there could be some trouble, perhaps, for the white king. Knight takes g2 might be on the cards. But there might even be stronger here. What white played here was actually knight c5, which seems to be a blunder because it allows c2, and this pawn all of a sudden is more important than this one. Here, white resigned. Why did white resign? If knight takes d3, knight takes d3, and this pawn's very strong, attacking the rook. So this looks as though it's very bad news for white. Say rook a1. Well, a piece up. Just be a piece up, winning that. So something went badly wrong here. Was this the blunder, or was there knight? Say knight takes c3. Could that have been played? Does anyone know what would happen if knight takes c3? Is it a problem with knight takes g2, or is there another issue? So what is the issue in this position? Does anyone know? What does black play here? Anyone? I don't think bishop takes because a8 is strong, isn't it? Rook h3. Knight takes g2. I assume it's knight takes g2. It looks good. Because then maybe, you know, like this later. Alright, thank you, Jordan. Apparently, no issue. Apparently Joel Benjamin, who's a strong grandmaster, while commenting, said that Karjakin must have been seeing ghosts and Wijk can actually hold. So it seems this was a disaster. But some people are suggesting on the Play Chess server now Rook d2, Psychomatic Koigak Rook d2 as being a strong move here. This does tie down the bishop and we've got lateral pressure. And maybe knight d3 now. If that bishop ever moves, then g2 is horrible. So rook d2 seemed like a very strong move. And maybe this is the sort of ghost that Karjakin had been seeing. I'm not sure how it will be defensible, this position. It looks dangerous because of knight d3 being a key threat. Okay, so that's interesting. In the final position, some mystery there. So instead we saw this seemingly, you know, very bad move in retrospect. Very easy to say things in retrospect. c2, and that was just winning. Okay, let's do a quick overview and summary. So it started off very solid classical opening by black, and some dynamism was somehow injected by making use of the one liability that black had. This fixed, seemingly fixed weakness became a bait to trap the white bishop later and to close in the trap. So we see a white bishop trying to take that pawn on a6 after bishop e6, and then the trap is closed in with c4 followed by queen c7, going 2 pawns down temporarily, but seeing it's a liability, it's a loose piece, and this tactic to regain a pawn. And now it seems black has all the pressure and coordinated rooks quite nicely and was able to restore material equality with advantage, moving the bishop casually away because knight is protected by the queen. So somehow he's outplayed his opponent. His opponent's still left with this asset of the seemingly dangerous a pawn, but there's pressure on the white position clearly, which resulted in a blunder. He's a pawn up here anyway, but this dangerous a pawn. So maybe knight takes c3. He had thought maybe rook d2 was very strong. It does seem very strong for knight d3. So if the bishop ever moves, there's rook takes g2. But in the game, knight c5, and then we saw c2, just really winning here. Okay. Possibly, you might ask, hold on a sec, what about b3? Is that a move? Just one last note about this game. b3, is that a potential move? What would black play here? Maybe just rook c3 to play c1 and attack the knight. That might be a move. Does anyone else see a strong move after b3 for black? What would you say here for black to play in this position? Anyone? b3. So if rook d1, maybe white can play rook. No, white cannot. Can white play rook a1 to hold? Rook a1? Someone else is suggesting knight e2. I'm not sure the point of knight e2. Rook d2, Mickey Blue Eyes, rook d2. Aha. Threatens, that's good. It threatens c1. So if takes, you take that, right? And what if rook a1? Our knight e2 check, and then c1, so you'd win the exchange. Alright, that looks pretty good. Rook d2 is an idea here. Okay. So this pawn looks dangerous after rook d2 anyway. Alternatively, just immediately knight e2, Germo indicates. Well done, Germo. So in this position, if b3, we could just play knight e2 immediately. So the rook cannot take because of c1. Good, very good. Just winning an entire rook. Very nice. Well done, Germo. Excellent. Crush. Knight e2 check. Crushing if b3. Okay, so this does look, and indeed a winning pawn here has emerged. So let's go on to another game. So as white in this game, okay, this just getting the PGN for the second game. Which I thought I'd recorded okay before. Against Gata Kamsky. So I've got the game score here against Gata Kamsky, but the footers are all wrong. One moment, I'm just going to just grab a game from the site Kamsky just quickly. Pardon me. Colson, Kamsky, right. Okay, Aronian playing white played knight f3, and Kamsky played knight f6. We have a very solid English opening, c4, g6, and the Grunfeld is very popular at the moment, even against knight c3 in this position, to play d5. So this is quite popular. So black's trying to liberate the position quite quickly out of the opening. So c takes d, knight takes, and now this queen b3, knight b6. This is a popular line. White might have the potential to build up a pawn centre in this line. He does so. d4, he puts both pawns in the centre. So it's I think neo Grunfeld, it's not a true Grunfeld. Bishop e3, and black traditionally tries to put pressure on d4 and does so here with bishop g4. So white supports that d4 square with rook d1. Okay, e6, and now bishop e2. So this may all be theory, but this next move is very interesting. Knight g1, a retreat, strategic retreat to get the knight back. So hitting that g4 bishop. It takes on e2. Knight takes e2. So d4 is adequately protected here by all these pieces protecting d4. So white seems to have a comfortable position from the opening after that strange retreat knight g1. Makes a lot of sense. Queen e7. Okay, maybe it looks as though queen b4 might be on the cards, but Levon's not worried by that. He just castles. And Kamsky plays rook f d8. Now e5, seemingly conceding the d5 square, but there's a lot of pressure on d5. Also, it blocks in that bishop clearly. h6, and now depriving black of the b4 square with a3. Okay, but the queen is a tempo gain now. Knight a5, queen c2, and if white gets another move, knight e4 will clamp down on c5, completely clamp down on c5. So black tries to liberate here by c5 immediately. In this position, c5 was played, trying to undermine white's pawn chain, particularly e5, be more exposed. Okay, but it's a pawn sacrifice, it's accepted. D takes c, knight bc4, hitting e5. So is e5 going to drop? Bishop c1. Yes, it drops, but now b4, and we have a 3-2 pawn majority on the queen side. Space advantage. Knight e4, and also now it's apparent that d6 is a nice square for white in this position to make use of d6. a6, trying to discourage. Also, white was threatening, b5 maybe. So h3, and now Kamsky plays f5, inviting the knight to go to that sensitive d6 square. So this looks like a very powerful knight. Knight f7 to try and trade it off. It comes back, and it looks as though black has slight weaknesses here. If this bishop can be exchanged off, then there might be some weaknesses exposed around the black king. But e5, now rook de1 introduces a sort of x-ray attack on the queen. Now maybe knight f4 or knight d4. These two squares are more vulnerable with this x-ray attack. King h7, bishop b2. So e5 coming under pressure now from some of white's pieces. Rook e8, which releases control of d4 actually, and white makes use of that d4 square to play knight d4 now. So using that pin on the queen. Knight takes d4, bishop takes d4. Rook a8, kicking the bishop away, goes back. Okay. e4, not minding the exchange of bishops, but is it weakening the black king? Maybe Kamsky is thinking, f4, e3 or knight e5. So anyway, the bishops come off, and now immediately this pawn chain is undermined with f3. Okay, f3, and it's difficult. Queen f6 was played here, which represents, well, it's going to temporarily give up the pawn for the check. Now rook takes e4. Is black slightly vulnerable after all this? Rook takes, queen takes, or is black heading for equality? So all these exchanges now. Okay, is this pawn a strength or a liability? Black controls that d file. King g3. Rook comes in. We get a complicated endgame position now, and it's quite grueling actually from this position, but these pawns are slightly loose. There is a 3-2 pawn majority to try and exploit, but b7 is the immediate target. So knight a5, g5. Okay, g5. At the moment, there's also rook d3 takes a3. That'll be check. So the king goes back. Okay, rook d3 anyway to trade this one for this one. Rook e1 takes. And in no rush to take here, he can take this one, and he takes that one. And now he's a pawn up. Okay, clear pawn up. 4 pawns against 3. Knight e5. It's a bit of a grind. There's counterplay. These pieces are quite active. Rook d4, which supports maybe, you know, check and then c6. Try and get this pawn going. Knight d6, which supports the idea that, you know, maybe knight f5 check. Get this one. Rook b3. Or this check could be useful, which is used. Check, check. Knight c4. Very interesting tactical move. Because now there might be rook d6 if takes. Check. Knight f4. Check. Knight e5. So we have pawns hanging here on both sides. This rook nicely attacking pawns. And after rook b2, okay, black is stripping white's king safety a little bit in this end game. Trying to get behind these two connected passed pawns. But now h6 drops as well. Okay, bit of a grind. Check, check, takes. Walking into a pin. Actually, rook b6, nasty pin. So white still just one pawn up now, but very dangerous position with this pin in this position. King f8. And this allows check. Knight c4. This is getting very dangerous for this knight. Rook b3 and now c6. And this knight pin is just vicious with c7. So simplified to a one position here, just with that extra pawn. So a bit of a grueling game to go over. A grind. Positional grind from a Grunfeld. So this is Gata Kamsky, the US #1 I believe, being beaten in a positional battle. Profound, really. Going into that endgame with slight weaknesses for black, then ending up losing because of the extra pawn on the queen's side. So a quick overview and summary. It's a hard positional game. Grind. But this knight e-g1 was very nifty to keep pressure on d4. Oh, sorry, Nakamura's #1, is it? So is Kamsky #2? He's #2, is he? Or in the top 5? So, hard positional game. And, okay, so swapping one pawn for another here. But it seems white got some squares here. d6. So, okay. I don't know what to say about this game. This is a very hard game to understand. Are these pawns kind of liable to a lot of pressure on e5? Maybe that's one issue with the position. So somehow it was prompted for e4. Maybe white potentially is going to build on e5. So f3 undermining black's pawns. So black, after all that, is left with a slightly weak pawn. And we go into this endgame where it's just a grind, really. Just emerging this very important pawn up after sort of forking these two guys. So that's important rook fork in the endgame to bear in mind. And grind is written all over this game. And then the passed c pawn is the final thing which defeats black. Just the power of the pawn and this pin. Two factors here. So let's go on to another game. Okay. So against Gashimov, that's interesting. That's my PGN facility is not really working that well at the moment. Okay, will I have to get the PGN again? Oh dear. Nope, that's not working great. Just grab the PGN from this chess games.com site. I'll just against Gashimov. Okay, so Gashimov was not having a great time in this tournament. So d4 from Levon. And what we have here is an exciting kind of modern Benoni transposition, which starts as though it's going to be a Nimzo Indian, but Gashimov now plays sort of Benoni style c5, modern Benoni. So he's avoided the f4 lines and bishop b5 check line in the Benoni, which is really dangerous. This is a safe way of getting the modern Benoni, but we still have this liability on d6. So interesting choice by Gashimov, quite dynamic and exciting, this opening choice. Check is going to come up now, so disrupting the bishop to put pressure on b7. And I once saw this, I think, in playing computer. It's probably theoretical, but it's annoying, definitely annoying, this tempo gain to put pressure on b7 now. b5 offering up d6 looks very interesting. Queen b6 hitting that bishop, and now able to castle. So black has some dangerous pawns here, it seems. e3, c4, and it seems white's passively retreating the queen, but of course it does protect d5, so any b4, this d5 is not a problem here. So b4 in fact played knight e2, bishop b5, because this pawn could be vulnerable, knight ed4, knight d7. White grabs that light square bishop, and now bishop d4, and it looked as though white wasn't doing that well here for a moment, but white's very solid here. After rook ac8, it looks as though these pawns are quite dangerous, as though maybe c3, black's got knight e4. It looks as though black was kind of active, but there's a very powerful move about to arrive in the position. After this casual looking rook fd8, there's a very powerful move that white played here, just picking on this queenside pawn, believe it or not. And it seems to give white a small but nagging, powerful advantage actually. White plays queen e1. Because look, there's no a5 because the bishop takes b6. So what does black do about b4? It is a bit tricky here. If queen d6, then maybe bishop takes, and bishop takes c4. So there's a problem here for black. He plays c3 to try and solve the problem. B takes, b takes. And now bishop a6. Horrible. Bishop a6. Not just the routine capture, because maybe queen a2 maybe, but the rooks are protecting each other here. But after this next move, this is now a liable rook on c7, not protected. So rook takes c3, grabbing a pawn, hitting that rook with tempo. No time for queen a2. Rook takes c3, queen takes c3, and now f6 is under fire from this battery. Knight e4, queen a3, protecting the a2 pawn. So clear pawn up, and now for some reason Gashimov is keen to go into an endgame, queen c5, which Aronian accepts. He's only a pawn up, but he thinks he can win it, and he takes the queen. And we see now a grind again, remarkable grind Knight takes e6, getting the advantage of bishop over knight. If these pawns can be fixed, especially, and we're about to see that, the pawns are about to be fixed very soon, very masterfully. a6 to get rid of this pawn for this one. And bishop e2, so only one pawn up, and it's able to do very well now for this position. Knight d7, rook c7, very passive knight, and bishop c4, big advantage. Look at this, horrible, horrible. The king could come in. It could start walking into the position. Black's very passive here. Rook on the 7th, cutting the king. So what a powerful advantage has been built up now. The king waltzes in now into the position. h4, f4. So there's no e5. Rook's beautifully on the 7th. The king is heading for f6. It's beautiful. There's nothing black could do. This infiltration. Fantastic attacking piece on f6. Brilliant. Now, rook f5 is a slight issue to deal with, because that would be maybe dangerous, for check over here. And so e4, it's covering that. Rook a4, now e5. After rook a3, going for that maybe, but rook c8 now threatens bishop takes e6 check, and black was resigned here. So Gashimov totally outplayed from just being a pawn down to get this horrendous position with this incredibly passive knight, and this incredibly aggressive king just waltzed into the position. So let's have a look at that game again. Positionally very impressive, that from what seemed to be nothing much, a queenside pawn weakness, was transformed into a pawn advantage. And that pawn advantage proved to be extremely significant. A very important move here, bishop a6, to make sure grabbing a pawn. And it just seems to go downhill for black. Amazing, really, that this endgame, maybe this wasn't the best. It's just amazing that this bishop was able to dominate the knight so easily, it seemed. But rook c1, if rook c8, then there was always takes and bishop d7. So Gashimov tried to exchange off one set of pawns, but this rook on the 7th, very, very powerful, ideal position, fixing, these weaknesses are just ready for an infiltration of the king, going into f6, and it's just nothing black can do here. So that was positioning, I thought, very impressive. Okay, let's look at another game. Okay, so now against Caruana, playing black. Not Caruana, Karjakin. Just grab the game for that. Pardon me. No, sorry. He was white against Caruana. Sorry, Caruana. So in this game, we see knight f3, c5, another English opening, c4, knight c6, knight c3. Now e5, which clamps down on d4 it seems, but white can still play for e3 and d4 to break the bind. And he does that, e3, and breaks the bind immediately actually with d4. C takes, e takes, e4. Doesn't mind playing knight e5. Okay, this is difficult for black it seems. Probably all theory so far. Bishop e2. Queen a5, so putting pressure on these points. But white just sacrifices a pawn here. I guess this must be some sort of theory. Sacrificing the pawn, or computer analysis or something. So a pawn sack from the opening, a gambit. What has white got for it? Okay, bishop d2 was now played. Bishop c5, knight b5, and all of a sudden, bishop c3 looks like a powerful move on that diagonal. But also these are kind of weak as well. So black has the castle. There was potentially some danger. Okay, so b4, bishop e7. So again, white is a pawn down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pawn down. So what has white got in compensation here in this position? Interesting. He plays f4, and maybe e takes, white plays bishop takes f3, and this bishop's kind of tied down. This rook's kind of tied down, and maybe this is unpleasant for black. So basically the queen retreats to e6. Bishop e3, eyeing a7 maybe, but offering b4. Also eyeing c7 would be threatening to win the exchange. Okay, so in this position the exchange is offered with bishop takes b4. Okay, exchange sacrifice, knight c7 winning the exchange. Is it going to be 2 pawns for the exchange? Rook b1 attacking the rook. Exchange of bishops. And now salvage operation for that knight, rook b8. Okay, strange position. Bishop b7. Rook takes, king takes. Queen b3. So white is the exchange up still. g6. Giving the king, maybe g7 if there's going to be a check here. Rook b1. Okay, then we get this check to win the a7 pawn. So still the exchange up. Okay, interesting. e3, threatening mate. So that's dealt with. Bishop f3. d5. Looks very unpleasant to go into this pin actually. Rook e1, but are these pawns dangerous? And here it looks as though what is black doing? This is going to drop. This queen's on this. It's very unpleasant that this queen's protecting this. So Kurana decides that maybe these 3 pawns are kind of dangerous, and he sacrifices an entire bishop now, going a rook down in this position. On move 27, he goes a rook down now. He plays queen d6 just to try and get these pawns going. Queen takes a8. Black is a rook down. Can you believe this? Game. d4. So if he gets in, d3 and d2, this is going to be dangerous. So these pawns need to be blocked or something. What is going on with these pawns? Queen a3, heading for a blockade square, but offering f4. That's taken. Doesn't look too convincing just yet. Rook f1, Queen e5, blockade, g3, providing maybe the king can come up, or the bishop can retreat as the game. Bishop g2. So a rook up, a3 protecting that pawn. Bishop f3, getting a strengthening the grip maybe. A rook down. Okay, where is the compensation? Queen b1 now, inviting queen d2, but maybe things like queen b6, hit f6, or queen still got access over here. So queen e1 to protect the bishop. And now f6 is targeted here, otherwise it's a passive position. So Aronian breaks out now by attacking this knight on f6 with g4, which makes way for queen h4s on f6. I mean, here's a rook up anyway. So this is getting dangerous now. But also queen here to here to here would be nice. So it takes queen g3, offering the bishop to get to the black king. Well, I think queen a3 wasn't played because queen h4 was a threat, or the same idea, queen g3 to e5. It's getting very dangerous for black. Black's a rook down here. So anyway, he takes that bishop, trying to, and offers the knight. So these pawns are the last fling of the dice, to get these pawns going. But rook takes f6. And now there's a threat discovery, maybe to win the queen and then take here. So king h6. Check. Rook takes f7, threatens. Queen g7 and queen f4. And all sorts of things now. Actually, queen f4 and then rook h7 if king h5. Check. The checks run out now, unfortunately, after king g3. Takes, and the checks run out. And here, black resigned. He's faced with horrible threats. Like mating, and also here and here is useful for mating. So I don't think the threats can be dealt with in this position. Okay, another really complex game, and I'm not sure. That gambit seems quite interesting and perhaps incomprehensible, one could say. What was the purpose of this gambit here? Would you guys like white in this position? You've given up a pawn. What is the compensation? Does anyone understand the compensation here? Do you prefer white? Just basically yes or no. If I give you 20 seconds to evaluate this position we had, would you prefer white in this position? So starting from now, do you actually prefer white? No. Strange, isn't it? Pawn down. What has he got for the pawn? Odd. What was black's issue in this game? It's a bit of a mystery, isn't it? It's a mystery. Well, bishop d2 to avoid structural damage. Bishop c5. Then it's knight b5. Threatening maybe bishop c3 and b4 is the other one to kick the bishop away. So we saw this, bishop e7. Did you prefer white here now after f4? Is the position very good now for white? This position, what was your evaluation here? Has white got enough for the pawn? If I give you 20 seconds here, what do you think of the position now? I think this bishop might be a problem now. Who prefers white now or black? It's hard. It's hard to evaluate, but also, I don't know. So if he had taken en passant, what about this? This bishop's definitely a problem, isn't it? These pieces are definitely a problem. But also known as rook e1 on the cards. It's like this bishop can't escape and the queen can't escape. So it's more difficult for black to play. And there's also bishop c3. Fascinating. So he gave up the exchange pretty soon. And that turned into a bishop sacrifice pretty soon. After bishop f3, this put black into a terrible position, and he gave up a bishop now to be a rook down. So quite an exciting game in a way, a rook down. And Aronian found a way to... He found the plan here. With this queen here, he managed to find a way to carve into the position. g4. And then queen g3, and it's dangerous now for black. The king has been exposed finally. Very complex games. Very complex. Okay, let's go on to another game. Okay. Gelfand. This is not going to paste in, is it? Nope. I'm having trouble with PGNs tonight, I'm afraid. Have to get them from this. Sorry about this. So let's look at the last game I've chosen. So Boris Gelfand is white, and so d4, d5, and another Queen's Gambit declined. Okay, so bishop e7 is a very popular move. Bishop e7, waiting move, waiting for knight f3. Bishop f4. So solid position for black. Knight bd7. As though c7 is a problem, but is it? Is it really tempting? Given knight e8 protects c7, it's not such a problem. It seems, anyway. Knight f3, now the knight's kicked. Now f5. Whoa! Dutch stonewall set up. He's weakened his dark squares, surely. What is this? You know, it's like Levon is playing the Dutch defence stonewall now, isn't it? I mean, doesn't this remind you of Dutch defence stonewall variation? Quite funny, that, isn't it? Solid but aggressive, but full of dark square weaknesses here. Would you agree? Dutch defence stonewall. Okay, so knight d6, but black has an iron grip on e4. Botvinnik's won many games from this sort of position. cd e takes, and now we've got this promise in the future of e-file pressure. Bishop d3, knight f6, knight e5. So big dark square weaknesses being exploited. E5 knight. But it can be challenged soon with this one to challenge that. Castles, knight f7. So it's not so bad. The dark square weaknesses are not so bad. E5 being put under more pressure. And now knight takes e5. So it seems a very favourable Dutch stonewall without too many weaknesses. A5. Now even more weaknesses created with b5. Outrageous. You know, what about c5 being weak? Knight c5. Queen e7. This bishop's not so bad. It's got scope. It's got squares. And this e5 is dropping, or is it? It's given up anyway. Rook ac1, so it's given up to get this dark square grip, it seems, with bishop takes and this knight. Is it stronger than this bishop? Is white's grip on the dark squares quite powerful? Bishop d7 supporting c6, queen c5. The queens are kept on in this game actually. Queen g6. But it did for a moment look like a Dutch stone wall, but now it seems black is a pawn up, but white has still that grip on the dark squares. King h2, h5, as though h4, queen g3 might be good. Rook ac8, holding on to c6. b4, so it looks like a dream dark square blockade position. AB, h4 now, so queen g3 is introduced, and maybe bishop h3 is dangerous. Knight e2, defending that. Now rook f6, and the rooks are starting to coordinate against f4. If they can double, here's the plan, and then the g5 you get pressure on the f file. So rook a1, rook c f8, queen e7. You know, this rook's able to roam in though. Is white getting pressure? Defending. Rook g1. So this rook infiltration looks dangerous here or here. Queen h6. Rook a7. Very clever move now to parry the pressure. Very clever. Just rook f8. Inviting, you know, queen takes, because then here and then this rook is liable. You know, if takes, then here, and this rook's going. So that was quite clever. Little trick. Queen c7. And this one comes now to defend there. Queen e5. The rook's kicking the queen now again. And now g5. So this diagonal could be important if g takes, and also e3 could be exposed. But also g4 is on the cards, which would undermine these two pawns. So it looks quite dangerous for white now. Rook f1. Queen d6. Also pinning this one, keeping the queen tied down to this one. Rook ef8. Finally, this coordination is looking pretty miserable for white now. Starting to look miserable. And there's also g4 on the cards to try and expose the king. This is out of the way. These pieces are not helping the king here. Queen c5, trying to change the queens. That's refused. Queen h6. f5. Okay, so this d7 is holding position. If bishop takes, then there's queen takes f8 because of that pin. So if bishop takes, queen takes f8 maybe. That's pretty nasty. It's on f5 as well if it takes. So f5, but king g8 is coming out of that, protecting f8 here. f6. But now free for g4 here, and that exposes pressure on e3 as well. g4. hg, and now h3 just tearing into the king safety, trying to weaken white's king. So he weakens white's king. Queen takes f6, and now he's got this one. He's got queen h4s, he's got queen g5. It's horrible all of a sudden. And also there's rook h7, so white is under pressure now. Rook h7, and it looks pretty miserable, this position. It's gone. I think this position is now gone actually. White's king safety has disappeared. So g5 is looking absolutely miserable. The rest is just combinatory. So sacrificing the exchange to tear apart the king. Check, check, rook h3 check, and here white resigned. It's miserable because I think, like something like king e2 or here, we get check, and it's going to be end of game soon. All with check. Well, something like bishop g4. That looks pretty good. Crushing. So let's have a look in overview and summary at that game. It seems that Aronian actually played a Dutch defence stonewall, believe it or not. This, would you agree, is a Dutch defence stonewall type position by transposition? Would everyone agree with that? Because didn't we used to think the stonewall was a terrible, terrible opening, and you wouldn't expect Aronian to touch this with a long barge pole? Would everyone agree this reminds one of Dutch defence stonewall territory? But it seems the weaknesses of it were totally unexploitable. Well, they weren't exploited by white in this game at all. Well, there was a temporary pawn sack. A pawn sack didn't seem to work out. So that's quite amazing, really. That he knew what he was doing with this. Putting cheekily both knights like this, because usually in Dutch stonewalls, white usually has knights here and here to go to e5, but now here black is controlling e4 and have this option to attack e5. Strange. This is the sort of thing Botvinnik, there's an iron grip on e4 here, and able to contest e5 with knight f7 and bishop d6. So does black stand badly? He's liberated his bishop as well. It's okay, it's blocked in by the pawn, but white dare not take to liberate the bishop. So strangely also we see even more strangeness. b5, it's like crazy. If queen takes c6 here, by the way, I think there's rook a6. Or hang on, queen takes a6 we didn't mention. What would happen here if queen takes c6? Actually, there's b5 on. What does black play here? Probably just bishop. Not bishop d7, because queen d5 is check. What does black play here? Does anyone know in this position? Has black got a good move? Anyone? Black to play here. Anyone really strong tactically has got an idea? Or Any ideas? Anyone? Because look, in this game, look, we had knight a4, b5. So why isn't c6 on? It's a mystery, isn't it? Queen c6. There must be a reason. There must be. Can't fathom it. Bishop a6, someone's suggesting. Alright, let's go with bishop a6. So, okay, you've got a point. I mean, knight c5. Well, if rook c8, then you've got I'm not sure about bishop a6. I think someone needs to put it into a computer to work out what happens after queen takes c6. Engine seems to think that white is winning after queen takes c6. Really? Oh dear, oh dear. Jordan, that sounds right. I was looking at that very briefly. I didn't believe it. Rook a6, queen takes, rook g6. We're now threatening queen g5. Good stuff. Wow. Accelerated attack. Put this into your ending, Toby Hock. Maybe this was the idea. Rook a6. I think this is the best idea I've seen so far. Rook g6. Isn't black winning now? Because, you know, this queen g5, if g3 just take. So queen g5. What do you do about g2? Yeah? That looks convincing. This looks like a very dangerous position for white. Would everyone agree? King h1? King h1 or king h2? Right, let's try king h1. I think just queen g5. If you play rook g1, you lose f2. Knight takes f2. And I'm threatening mate. End of game. Yeah? I don't believe it. Looks like a vicious attack. That looks like an absolute vicious attack. Brilliant conception. This conception, b5, wow. This idea of swinging the rook. Actually, this WGM I played in British one, Susan Lalick, she used a similar rook manoeuvre to get to my king, but I managed to draw with WGM. That was one of the title players I once drew with in the British Championship. Okay, so but she played a very dangerous rook manoeuvre like this. So it's accelerated here with this pawn sack. That's got my interest up. So it seems, I don't know. Okay, so that wasn't accepted, and white sacked pawn for some sort of compensation, which you know, maybe wasn't enough. Now, funny enough, it seems that potentially this knight was going to be better than the bishop, but no, it's sort of passive. White was passive. So okay, so the king's safety was undermined, and it's just white was blown to bits now. So interesting games from Levon. Okay, that could have been an example continuation. So yeah, mysterious. Some very advanced positional games. I think one of my favourites was this one because it sort of ended in a vicious attack. I don't know what you guys thought. Did you prefer the attacking games? There's a brilliant game on YouTube though, which against Giri. That was one of my favourite Levon wins. But I think this is one of my favourites as well with Black. So anyway, so I hope you enjoyed this week. Any other comments or questions? Otherwise, I'll see you probably next Tuesday at the normal time. So I hope you got something from these games. Thanks very much. I'll be uploading this video to YouTube. If you've got any other comments, you can also post your comments there. I'm usually Tuesday at 9 o'clock usually. Okay. So, okay. Thanks very much. PM.